Thank you, Al. Next, we will hear from Representative McGeehan, who has introduced House Bill 878, which will provide a one-time, 2-year window in which victims could bring a civil action in cases previously barred by the current statute. Representative Michael McGeehan is no stranger to taking on controversial issues when it comes to protecting the welfare and safety of children and their families. He has led the campaign to install sprinklers in college dorms and defended code requirements for private housing. He's been an outspoken critic of the mismanagement of the Philadelphia School District and has had legislation passed mandating fiscal responsibility of it. Thankfully, Representative McGeehan has again stepped up to the plate, this time on behalf of those who've had no voice as children, by introducing House Bill 878, the window bill, which Justice for PA Kids proudly endorses. Representative McGeehan.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I'd like to, first of all, commend Maureen and the organization Justice for PA Kids and all the folks behind us today for their tireless commitment to protecting children in the face of often scorn, ridicule, and indifference. It's a pleasure to work along with my colleague, Representative Bishop, in what I feel is one of the most important pieces of legislation in certainly my 22 years in the state legislature. I also want to commend Representative Milne, who is here as well, and lending his voice to this effort. A special thanks to Al Chesley, who the only thing bigger than his physical presence is his heart and his courage. You know, it's doubly difficult for Al because he's such a person of high prominence to come forward and expose himself to that indifference. And I'm frustrated that we have to be here again the second time in a year. And I'm ashamed to report as a member of this House that there is indifference. There's indifference to the plight of these children. And it's a cold reality that the House hasn't acted. And I'm perplexed to know as to the reasons why. I read almost daily about the reports of abuse in every newspaper in every corner of this country. And it cries out for justice. In an important state like this, the Keystone State, it is unforgivable that we haven't acted in a more timely fashion. And I want to pledge to the people who have been here not once, not twice, but many times on behalf of these initiatives that Representative Bishop and I are going to redouble our efforts in the House this year. You know, pardon me, whatever the catalyst was for each of us to be here today, we unequivocally agree that laws need to be changed to protect children, not the predators and organizations that shield them. We put our full faith and trust in institutions and in the people who run them to guide us and to help us. In exchange, we expect leadership, truth, and accountability. But when our government, our schools, our churches, our clubs, our boys and girls organizations turn a blind eye to criminality of the worst kind, we need to do something about it. When organizations are more important and more interested in self-preservation than in self-policing at the expense of children, then it's time for action in the halls of Harrisburg. What House Bill 878 simply does is to allow past victims of child sexual abuse to access the justice system, to have the opportunity to subpoena records and depose suspects. Some argue that abuse victims should have acted more timely. Yes, kids have the right to sue when they were molested, but they didn't have the wherewithal to do so. Like Al, they knew and trusted their tormentors, and they didn't know where to turn. They didn't know anyone would believe them, and they had their trust and self-esteem shattered. Decades later, as you heard from Al's personal experience, many struggle with alcohol and drug abuse. They divorce. They end up in prison. And many kill themselves. Meanwhile, the malevolent abusers escape criminal charges and continue to abuse, often with the full knowledge of their employers. Understand that underlying House Bill 878, this 2-year civil window, the burden of proof is on the victims to prove gross negligence, a very high standard indeed. But if it can be proved that a person is directly responsible for putting a child in harm's way, then they should be prosecuted as in any other case, whether it happens last year or whether it happened 25 years ago. Even though the window legislation expressly excludes all entities, public or private, one concern that surfaces is that whether sovereign immunity for public institutions like school districts may trump that proposal. So there's no question that a public entity can be found liable. Today, Representative Bishop and I, and hopefully with the support of Representative Milne and others, will introduce House Bill 1895, which calls for making child sexual abuse one of the exemptions to the sovereign immunity defense. It would add a 10th exemption to that, and I believe one of the most important exemption we could make. I've also drafted the same legislation as an amendment to House Bill 878 so that my bill's intent is solidly reinforced. Nothing will change until this bill, though, is brought up before committee. We can talk about changes, we can hold rallies in the state capitol, but nothing will change unless the committee takes this important piece of legislation up and puts it before the full House. Changing the statute of limitations law is fraught with misconceptions, conflict, and hypocrisy. But if ever there was a reason or a time to hold hearings to debate the issue and craft laws that fully protect the most vulnerable of our society, the time is now. It's long overdue. I want to commend, again, Al and Maureen and Bob and Sister and the rest of the groups who are here today in demanding that the House take up this bill. I join in that call, and I asked my fellow representatives and senators to do likewise. Thank you for the time.